Netflix disrupted the space and has changed forever the way video is presented to people across the world.
With Amazon these days, you do a couple clicks and it gets you to where you need. You get anything you want from just 2 clicks. And these days, people can have things done easily with the help of technology.
Our companies should look a lot like this, but there's a problem. More often, they feel like that.
The old sweatshop. So there are a lot of challenges. So, whoa, what is the problem? Wow, there's lots of problems on there. And how do we deal with all these challenges?
When we first started putting this webinar together, Bill, Jeremy, and I all had something in common. And part of the reason for us introducing the Chevette Corvette paradox is because we all had those ugly old cars back in the 80s.
My son is the CMO of GitLab, and his company has always been remote from the day they started. They say they have 1,300 offices because there's 1,300 employees right now with that company.
So hello, everybody. My name is Lily Avalihun. I am CEO of Hebronsoft. As part of Hebronsoft Institute free offerings, today we have our 4th webinar. We are here for our 4th webinar, Agile for Leaders, More Than a Framework. I'd like to mention a couple technical capabilities for today for the webinar. First of all, it will be recorded for those who are not able to make it right now and who've asked us to make this recording. Secondly, we will have 2 polls with 3 questions each to better understand you, our audience. And thirdly, we will monitor chat and Q&A section in real time, and we'll try to jump on relevant questions. If we do not answer some of the questions, we'll try to email you answers as soon as we can after the webinar. Okay, so the topic of the webinar, yes, was already presented, Agile for Leaders, More Than a Framework. Slide number 2. This event is sponsored by Hebronsoft. We help your business succeed through better software. We help mostly US and Canada-based companies with their software needs. As Hebronsoft, slide number 3. As a technology company, our team of experienced professionals provide full spectrum services in web and mobile, custom software development, blockchain, and team extension. As a solution partner, we are innovators who are eager to develop ready solutions and accelerators needed in the marketplace. As a development company, we help our clients to extend their workforces with additional technology capabilities. And as a social enterprise, which we are very proud of, we support Hebron IT Academy with funding, mentoring, and internship. So now I'd like to introduce you to our subject matter experts and our facilitator for this webinar. Our subject matter experts are Jeremy Barriott and Chris Stape. Jeremy is a Chief Executive Officer of Barriott and Associates Consulting Group and Head of Engagement in Canada for Hebronsoft. And Chris Stape is CEO and Enterprise Business Agility Coach at Agile Slopes. Chris and Jeremy, please say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Oh, Chris, you must be muted.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you. Here we go. And Bill, who will be facilitating the webinar, is our dear Hebronsoft advisor, principal of Handlebar Consulting, who's been helping businesses flourish since 1997. So before we go into our discussion, I'd like to do a quick poll to better understand you, our audience. We will have 3 questions and you can vote now. Okay, I hope our audience can see the poll because, oh, here we go. People started. Okay, we'll just give it a couple more seconds for the rest of the people. Oh, I see more and more joining. So for those who've just joined, we've started our first poll with 3 questions to better understand our audience. So please choose the right answer for you. I see only 61% just voted, so we'll wait more, 70%. So we'll wait for a couple more seconds. All right. So I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. Okay. So Bill, would you like to take over and discuss the results?
Well, yes, let's look at the results there. We have a mixed audience of executives and directors and also practitioners, and it's great to have all 3 groups represented. And I'm not surprised at that. The topic is that you've put me up as a SME, but I'm going to be the dumb consultant that asks questions and tries to learn something today. And I hope all are in that mindset of seeing what you can pick up. And so that's the main thing we want to do, is to find a gem or a piece of wisdom here or an idea that you can apply quickly. So a lot of folks are into quarterly planning rather than annual planning. I find that very interesting too. When I started my career, it wasn't unusual to do a 10 or a 5 or 10 or 20-year plan for our businesses that I was consulting with when I was a banker. And yet now, boy, it's tough to plan next week as well as something longer than that. So I'm not surprised. Lily, I'm trying to look at the third one as well. But how does your organization deliver the work you have? And you have some project management things going on. And you also have some other ways of delivering. And so it's interesting that we have that mix. We hope that we can address all 3 of those issues and look at how we can help you in some way here today. So the first question is, I guess we're going to look at an agenda here, Chris, if you could show that for us real quick.
Yeah, I'm having a slight technical difficulty here. I'm trying to get us back there. Can we just have a second?
Yeah, it did pop off. Chris is running the slideshow here today, just to get us going and show us some things. I'm going to talk about our agenda here. We're going to ask about what is the problem to be solved here? What is Agile, the Agile approach really talk about, and how can it help? So certainly we want to define what Agile is. And in that regard, we're going to present 3 principles that might be helpful for you as you consider how an Agile approach to managing your business, as well as what's been going on for many years, an Agile approach in the technology part of your business. And certainly leadership is the foundation, and we're going to talk just a little bit about the role of leadership in applying an Agile approach to the business.
Guys, just confirm for me quickly, you're seeing the agenda now, is that correct?
No.
You're not.
I'm not, no.
You should be seeing it now. I'm so sorry about that difficulty.
That's okay. We are exactly where we're supposed to be. And so the question is, what is the problem to be solved? Let's just talk about some of the business challenges and problems that we have right now. Chris and Jeremy, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we both do. Jeremy and I are, out in the community, out in many companies, working with many companies right now and talking about what's happening both locally, nationally, and across the world. But generally speaking, we're all experiencing some different challenges and different problems. Just like I just experienced some technical challenges just a minute ago. I apologize for that. There's a problem to be solved, and there's a problem that's going on around us in the market. There's a problem that's happening in the world. You've probably heard the phrase before that software is eating the world, that software is changing everything. And what that means is that we're experiencing a technology boom like never before. In fact, many of you might be experiencing something where you think that your company and the way you act today should look a lot like this. Obviously, this is a picture taken from the movie Minority Report, right? And you think that in the age of big data, in the age of AI, in the age of natural language processing, and all of the emergent technologies that are supporting what we do, that our companies should look a lot like this. But there's a problem. More often, they feel like that.
The old sweatshop.
How many of you can relate to that? Jeremy, what are your
Man.
thoughts?
So yeah, like the vision of what people have to the reality of what occurs is obviously quite different in most organizations, and in some of the groups that I've worked with, it's just as you see it here, kind of everyone at their desk doing their work. Pretty simple, no magic wands, no magic keyboards going on, getting stuff done.
Oftentimes, in a lot of organizations, the contrast between these two states can be very painful. You can feel like it's supposed to feel one way and it ends up being another thing. So it leads us to this idea, what's the problem to be solved? The reason we start with the idea of what the problem is to be solved is because we believe the idea that if you can form the right problem statement, then you're well on the way to solving the challenges and the problems that take place within your organization. And if there's a disparity in how you think it should be feeling, but what the actualization of that is, then we want to talk about that. We want to address it. Well, certainly one of the biggest challenges we're facing today has to do with something that probably a lot of you have heard about, something called the digital disruption. Lilia, you work right in the heart of the digital disruption with your teams. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Sure. Yes. So when when we help some of our clients, it's weird to see how much technology can change their business model, can change their approach, and can help their clients succeed. Was like with Amazon these days, you do a couple clicks and it gets you to where you need. You get anything you want from just 2 clicks, and these days people can have things done easily with the help of technology.
I thank you. I really appreciate that example of Amazon. They're probably one of the biggest disruptors in the world today. Amazon, Apple, Netflix. We've got a couple of examples here on the screen. A real great example of the digital disruption is what took place between Blockbuster and Netflix. How many of you have gone to a Blockbuster if you're in the United States or Canada recently? Probably not very many of you. 15 years ago, if you'd asked that question, there were probably many of you that would have gone to a Blockbuster or had videos sent to you. But Netflix disrupted the space and has changed forever the way video is presented to people across the world. At the height, Blockbuster had about 6,500 stores. Today, Netflix has several hundred million consumers and users monthly because of the ease with which they deliver digital content to us in our homes, on planes, on when we're in the hotel visiting someone in another city. Another great example of the digital disruption comes with taxi and Uber. A few years ago, when I visited New York City, I was quick to jump in a taxi. But today, if I go to New York City, maybe not during COVID because we're not traveling as much right now, but in a time when we are traveling, I never use taxi service anymore. I feel so much more confident with the ease and the use of a company like Uber. And these are just 2 great examples of digital disruption. Each of you in the companies that you work in are facing similar digital disruptions, but there's disruptions also coming from other spaces.
Well, Chris, you mentioned that disruption of COVID right now, which we all hope is temporary, but the fact is it is a disruption, and it has changed the way we're doing business currently, but I think it's probably changed the way we're doing business forever, in some ways at least. I don't think Zoom meetings are going to go away just because we finally find some treatments for COVID or whatever. And certainly that lends itself to the comment about remote work. My son is the CMO of GitLab, and his company's always been remote from the day they started. They say they have 1,300 offices because there's 1,300 employees right now with that company. But there are lots of places like that. And I remember when I was traveling and working for a big tech company called IBM. They were starting already to empty some of their businesses and business offices and work more from home. And I'd go to have a meeting in one of their business offices in downtown Chicago, and you walk past a lot of empty cubicles. And that was many years ago. And here now it is even more so now. And many more people and companies are finding ways to do work, but not have to have a location that everybody has to go to. And there's other challenges as well that are affecting us. There are geopolitical challenges that are going on with the economy and with protectionism and trade issues and stuff going on. There's environmental challenges that we're having as well, and global warming and water crisis and things like that, as well as societal changes. We seem to be spreading apart and not being as unified as we used to be, and certainly technological challenges, just like the digital issues, but also security issues, loss of privacy, and things like that. So there are a lot of challenges. So, whoa, what is the problem? Wow, there's lots of problems on there. And how do we deal with all these challenges? Well, we hope that this seminar on how to be agile, how to be really have the agility to respond to some of these and respond quickly and appropriately, that is helpful. So Chris, what is Agile all about? I'm a sales guy. Help me out here.
It's a great question. Before I answer that question, I'm just going to give one other example of disruption that's taking place that maybe some of you can relate to. How many of you have children in your home now doing school from home in ways that you never would have experienced a year ago? We never would have dreamed of this, which suggests, just as you just described, Bill, there are challenges and disruptive forces coming from many, many different spaces. And what we suggest is that this idea of agility helps us in this space, because agility does something for us. If we're agile in our approach, it gives us an ability to see what's happening and to respond to change as a way of dealing with uncertain and turbulent things, just like this description or this definition suggests. What we want to do is look and see for real what's taking place with eyes of reality rather than eyes of hope. We want to understand where we are and manage what's taking place, but do it in a way that leads us to hopeful outcomes, because we're doing things to embrace the turbulence and the uncertainty. But there's a challenge. Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about what the traditional approach to Agile is and what it looks like?
So the way when Agile was created back in 2001, it was through 12 developers out in a hotel in Utah. And it was for them how to develop and deliver code more effectively, more efficiently, and with higher quality and with what people want. And when everyone takes a look and speaks about Agile, that's what everyone sees. Everyone sees that it is a developer, a product owner, a QA analyst, an architect. They are the group, pardon me, they are the group that takes care of, they're the ones that do Agile. Everyone else does not. Everyone else follows their structure. They have their way of doing things, which has been for years and years and years. And that's the traditional view of Agile, is it's just strictly within a technology team.
Yeah, so that is the traditional way. Agile's for those guys, but the rest of us, the business, we act this way. We fund.
We've got CEOs, we've got other C-level people here, we've got division managers. We've got a lot more than just practitioners attending this seminar here.
We do, and that's why we're hoping to bring a new thought model to you today. Because this traditional view of Agile, when we go into organizations, when we go in specifically, we first start at the C-suite and talk with you folks in the C-suite. And the reason we do is because we need to recognize a couple of things. We need to see where the corporate strategy is and how it's actually lining up with what's being done. Because very often this traditional mindset of Agile's for those guys, the engineers, but not us, prevents us from holistic value delivery. And maybe there's a better way. And to help us take a look at this better way and how we might see this differently, we've got kind of a funny paradox we want to introduce to you. Jeremy, you want to talk about this?
Yes, so this is the paradox I like to use, is the Chevette Corvette paradox. If you think of an organization as a race car team with multiple cars as a team, and you cross the finish line is when everyone at the same time. Your development teams who are running through Agile, going through the principles, going through that mindset, they're the nice shiny new supercar Corvette. They have a lot of horsepower. They're able to get to where they need to get as fast as they need to get. Other parts of the organization that need to work with them, because they're in the old, like, traditional model of how they do things, they're the Chevette. So in all actuality, what's happening is you are either going to burn out, have some issues with the Chevette trying to keep up with the Corvette, or you're going to be leaving a lot of horsepower and a lot of value on the table as the cars are trying to keep pace.
But Jeremy, I thought all vets were the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought so. Hey, Jeremy, I thought so too when I bought my new Chevette in 1980. And that's what it looked like just a couple years later. It got great gas mileage. It was cheap, in other words, but I didn't get the performance that you were talking about with a Corvette. Since then, I've been able to afford a little higher priced car and a little better car, like a good German engineered car nowadays. But back then, it was that's all I could afford, and I tried to make that work with a family of four and a dog and a cat. Great gas mileage until it died on me. I didn't keep that car very much longer.
What we're really trying to point out here is the difference between these two types of vets. Yeah. And that when organizations act in traditional ways, it may be what's brought us success to this point, but it might be a lot like driving that Chevette, where we've got another part of our organization that's hard charging and racing forward. I'm working with an organization today where that's happening for them, where their product management development teams are far outpacing the other parts of the organization in their ability to keep pace. And so because of that, the traditional business units are becoming the bottleneck to increased value delivery in that organization. And thus we see the paradox of the Chevette and the Corvette. Bill, I think we've got another poll here, don't we?
Yes, we do. And really what we want to do here is ask our audience to respond a little bit, because when you're talking about delivering value, that's really success for how we would define internally success for our company. So let's look at these questions real briefly here. And I would ask you to take a few seconds to answer each one of these three questions that I have.
Yeah. It's about how you measure your goals. How do you prioritize your biggest work initiatives? And how often do your teams deliver against business strategy?
Yeah.
So take a minute and answer those for us, if you will.
Bill, while they're answering, I've done the exact same thing with my Chevette way back when.
Did you have one too?
Yes, I did.
All right, I'll share the results. Here we go.
Looks like the majority of everyone measures goals somewhere in between, 55%. And then 36% are delivering value against outcomes with objectives and key results. And then about 10% don't know. That's a fair response. Do we appreciate you who say, I don't know, because it's a vulnerable space, but that's the seed of growth and learning, is when we can recognize where we really are. How do you prioritize against your biggest works, the epics and initiatives? It looks like the majority of folks, we're tied between, we're starting to incorporate feedback loops from customers, and we're also starting to build lean business cases. That's wonderful. For the 10% that are overwhelmed, we've got some thoughts about that. How often do your teams deliver against your business strategy? About 73% say sometimes. Based on the experience that I've had in different companies, I say that's probably about average, is somewhere between 60 and 80% of companies develop and deliver against their goals sometimes. What is your experience like, Jeremy, in the space?
I would say roughly the same, like 75% sometimes. One organization I worked with was uh, they had a huge initiative where they had to revamp their application for their clients and their goal was within 12 months. And for the first few months, I would say the sometimes was right. They weren't meeting some of their goals, but with a little bit more coaching and working through, they were actually able to get to the end goal 2 months ahead of time. So they sped up their productivity and provided the value they needed to what they planned against in a shorter period of time than what they thought they would.
Wonderful.
Yeah. But it may take some outside help to be able to step back away from the reality of every day and really have someone like Jeremy come in and take a look at it.
Well, it leads. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
What is business agility? Okay, so that's the problem. So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, the problem is we've got one part of the organization acting one way and another part acting differently. Well, the answer to this is what we see again here in the heart of agility. What we're really trying to help organizations learn to do is to adapt and respond to change, and to view that adapting and response as opportunity, not threat. That idea of being able to respond to what's happening and not just see it as threat is probably the difference between evolving to the next best state or being relegated to the ash heap of corporate history. And what we don't want to do is be on that ash heap of corporate history. Instead, we want to embrace a new way of thinking. And so this idea of agility is now extending beyond just agility for those guys, but more to a holistic understanding of the idea of business agility across the enterprise or across the organization. And I want to suggest, when I say across the enterprise, that connotes large organizations and companies. But the truth is holistic business agility can happen in startups, all the way up to the largest companies in the world. And we've had business experience helping in transformations at every one of those levels, from startup to the multinational conglomerate.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, because there's a better way. And the better way is aligning the organization to a new operating model, so that now we've got these race horses in one part of the company, but we're teaching the other part of the company to also become race horses as well. So we're evenly yoked instead of having one part outpace the other part of the company.
Well, then, the question is, how do you do that?
It's a great question.
Let's look at some concepts that you guys are going to tell us about.
Yeah, there's 3 Agile concepts I think we're going to talk about today. The first of the Agile concepts has to do with something really simple. It has to do with the idea of mindset. Jeremy, what do you think the importance of mindset is in organizations?
To me, it's critical. It's something that organizations who are going down that agile journey, agile path, need to have. I've seen a lot of organizations that just kind of do agile. They have their scrum steps and their sprints, and they run them across. They kind of rubber stamp their way through each of the ceremonies, but their behaviors and their mindset across using it is not there. And what that does is it just creates it creates frustrations across teams, across individuals, across groups, and maybe that lack of knowledge and using that mindset is not there. And once you start moving into that, then things start to flow. Things start to make sense.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the conversation about flow, because that's one of the concepts we talk about a little bit later too. But if we talk about mindset, when we talk about mindset, we want to talk about some of the seminal work on mindset. Probably some of you here are familiar with the work of a lady by the name of Carol Dweck. She is a psychologist who's worked to build understanding in people and organizations across the world about what it means to have the right kind of mindset. And she presents 2 different mindsets. She suggests that for most of us, we're either in one of 2 spaces. Either we're in a fixed mindset where we think that the things that have gotten us to where we are just what's needed and we always stay there, or we're in a growth mindset. The growth mindset is contrasted this way because it's the idea about continuing to stretch and do new things and to solve problems in new and different ways. And I love this quote by her because it talks about this passion for the growth mindset means stretching yourself and sticking with it even and especially when things may not be going well. Because we all know something, when we're trying something new and different, we're not experts at that thing until we become more practiced in it and learn from the experience. Well, the hallmark of this idea of a growth mindset is challenging the status quo to new levels of work and new levels of work, new levels of becoming. It's the difference between the fixed and growth mindset. We've got a couple of things that we'd suggest you might consider when we talk about your organization and about where you are. The first one is, what's the prevailing mindset of your workplace? Is your workplace, is your company, is your organization in a fixed mindset space or a growth mindset space? Depending upon where you are individually, depending on where you are as teams, there's going to be significantly different outcomes that result based on that mindset. Jeremy, you want to talk about the second thing we're asking them to consider?
Sure. So the second thing to consider is, are you contributing to the problem? And it's not to focus on there's issues within individuals. It's the overall within the mindset and the process, and being agile is following a flow and a process. And when their issues come up, it's not an individual issue. It's more of it could be linked back to a process issue. And if you're allowing just to be okay with the processes and going to flow and being frustrated as you go across, that's contributing to limiting that growth concept, that growth mindset. So you're not getting to where you're not improving, you're not continuously improving. You're just kind of status quo. We'll deal with it as we go and on to the next.
Thanks,
Jeremy, we've looked and seen that our audience is a combination of C-level people, but also department managers and directors, as well as practitioners. I would say that this is really some stuff about leadership of that to have the right mindset for the whole organization. And even practitioners need to have and exhibit this kind of a mindset to not only be in alignment with their superiors, and the whole company, but also their influences are in their own practice. And a practitioner can, and especially an experienced practitioner, can very well help the mindset of their own peers.
Yes, and that's for sure the case. And that's the way, if you look at those organizations that are agile across the board, like there was a study done a couple of years ago of 2,500 companies, and only 4% of them were considered agile from nuts to bolts. Those organizations that everyone is a leader within the organization, and they have a say, and they have a way to help the teams, the individuals, and it's just going to organically grow across the board.
Right.
Wonderful. Great first two thoughts to consider. The last thing we're going to ask you to consider is this. As you've thought about mindset, just in the short few minutes we've been talking about it, what immediate thoughts do you have about fostering a better environment through the change of mindset? Are there places and spaces where, as a leader, wherever you are in the organization, you might change your mindset to change the environment? So that's, our first conversation point about mindset. And it leads us to the next principle here we're going to talk about. It's the idea of systems thinking. And systems thinking is a different way of approaching the problem. Jeremy started to talk about this just a little bit a minute ago. But when we talk about systems thinking, what we're really talking about is seeing the entire process of our company as a whole, rather than as the component that maybe I have direct stewardship for, or I have direct management responsibility for. And a great metaphor for this is the metaphor of the car. Because think about it this way. If I were to ask you to start naming parts of your car, or of any car, you could start naming things like the wheel, the muffler, the transmission, the brakes, the struts, the camshaft. And the truth of it is, when you think about your car, you don't care about the camshaft. You don't care about the brakes. You don't necessarily care about the taillight until one of those components isn't working. Because when one of those components isn't working in the system fails. So take, for example, you have a flat tire. Well, that's going to create a delay for you of about 30 or 40 minutes. But take, for example, your transmission's out. Wow, that's going to create a much more significant delay for you. And it's going to be several $1,000s to fix. So when we talk about systems thinking in our organizations, we want to think about it from the perspective of the metaphor of the car. We don't care about the car until it's not working. Well, the same is true for organizations, and more specifically for our customers. What they care about is the value that we deliver through the full system. So we're going to ask you to start thinking about your organization as a full system end to end. And when we talk about that, there's a few bullet points here that suggest things we should think about. The first one I've already alluded to, and that is that a system has to be managed. It will not manage itself. And there's people within the organization that have the responsibility to manage the system, both the people working in those components, but also the leadership team who has the responsibility to see the system as a whole. The second bullet point there, the idea that left to themselves, individual components become selfish. It's just the nature of how things are. One department stops thinking about its impact to other departments if it's left alone. And so if we don't have this systems view, we can quickly get out of balance within our organization. Jeremy, you want to talk about that third bullet point?
So, yeah, so if you look at it from Agile and how teams work, the big concept everyone looks at is self-managed teams. And yeah, like to the second point, you can't leave them by themselves because they could become selfish. But within the right environment and in a system, the cooperation across the teams will create that more functioning system to work. If you think about it, we brought the example of the car, but if you also think about the cells in the body, we all have different cells in the body, but they are individually doing their own thing, but together they are working more to keep us alive, to keep us moving and functioning. So the secret between the components is to keep them self-managed, but also with the leadership and guidance, giving them that direction of everyone of where to go. And with that, that's where you're going to get the most value.
I love it. Leads us to the next point about systems thinking. Jeremy, this is, I think, something that just really resonates powerfully with you.
Yeah. So Gary Motorshed, he came up with this quote. I came across it a few years ago, and it makes total sense if you think about it. A bad system can destroy good people. So if within the organization, the flow, the consistency across the teams, the Chevette Corvette paradox, if you look about it, how all those systems will work together, and if it's not in a good functioning agile methodologies, continuous improvement, it's going to affect your employees. It's going to affect the people that are working it. So like low employee satisfaction scores, and then that then builds up to potential quality issues within the product, which will then impact customer satisfaction scores. So this bad system, if it exists and if it's in an organization, it's going to have far-reaching issues outside of just some frustrations here and there within the company.
I appreciate what you're saying more than you know, Jeremy. I really believe that a bad system is a challenging state. And the people for whom it's most challenging are the people in the company doing the work. Because the truth is most people, not all, but most, come to work every day to do the very best they know how to do. And if they're working in a bad system, their outcomes are limited because of the nature of the system. There's only one group of people in an organization who have ultimate ownership of that system, and that's the leadership of the organization. You're going to notice that each of these principles are practiced at the individual level within the company or the organization, but ultimately it also leads to us having a conversation about how leadership founds everything that we do. Leadership owns the system. So here's a few things you might consider. We're going to talk about just a couple things you might consider as it relates to your system. Here's the first thing. When we talked about the metaphor of the car, what did it mean when you had a flat tire? It meant you had a delay, which meant that you had a value loss. Maybe you had to get to work on time. Maybe you needed to pick up your child from childcare or school, and now you can't. Well, the same thing's true in our companies. When we experience delays in the system, our customers experience the loss of value delivery to them. It's a big deal. The second thing is, again, delays usually equal lost time. And so then it talks about, where do we begin? Well, the place we begin is by looking at the system as a whole. These are things to consider. Look for your delays. Figure out and quantify what the delays are costing you with hard metrics, and then start talking about where to begin. And all of this leads us to the last principle we'll talk about today. And it's the principle we call flow. And a great way to envision the principle of flow is to go back to the metaphor of the car. Hey, Bill, when you were driving that 1980 Chevette, how did you know when you didn't have flow? What was happening to the car?
Something bad was going on, or the gas tank was going down. Although I got good gas mileage, but that was about it. Yeah, it wasn't a comfortable ride to start with.
You know, it's funny.
You have to move. You have to keep moving forward. That's what the car is, to get me from point A to point B. It's not just to sit in there and enjoy the radio.
When we first started putting this webinar together, Bill, Jeremy, and I all had something in common. And part of the reason for us introducing the Chevette Corvette paradox is because we all had those ugly old cars back in the 80s, which says something about us being a little bit old. But it's a great example of the absence of flow. If you're in your car and the fuel filter goes out, what happens to your car? It shuts down on the side of the road, right?
Yeah.
So flow is the idea of a continuous recurring value delivery without start-stop, without interruption, without delay. And you'll notice that flow and systems thinking are very related that way. There's a great mind out in Silicon Valley. His name's Don Reinertson. He says this, and it's a really great quote, that operating a process near full utilization is an economic disaster. And I'm about to give you an example of this in the real world, and then I'm going to ask you to think about it in your organization. Because we often think about processes being things related to systems, but we don't often think about processes being related to us as the system of people. Here's the metaphor that you're going to like a lot. How many of you have seen this screen? The blue screen of death. It's one of the worst experiences you have when you're working on a project on your computer. All of a sudden you're in the middle of doing something and all of the system resources lock up. Why? Why do they lock up? Well, often it's because if you were able to do a system monitor right before this blue screen of death popped in front of you, you'd find that all of your resources were highly utilized. Maybe your CPU utilization was above 80%. Maybe your memory utilization was above 80%. And pretty quickly, because everything's being used, the whole system locks up. The system utilization causes a disaster locally. And you know what's funny is we often consider this when we talk about things like CPUs or servers or now things in the cloud. But how often do we consider this when we talk about the system of people that are doing the work? And consider it from this perspective. In traditional project management speak, if I use a Gantt chart and lay it out before you, at what percent allocation do we allocate people on a Gantt chart? Every time, 100%. Every time. And guess what? I'm going to share a surprise with you. 100% allocation results and 100% failure every time, and especially in the systems of people. And there's a secret to it. The reason why is because we don't recognize the variability of the problems that we're seeking to solve today in complex business settings. And so because of that, we ask you to consider in your flow this idea of not operating and utilizing all of your resources at 100%.
Yeah.
You know, as we're need to move along here, that's my job. Let's talk about, how do you do this flow thing? Give me some thoughts on to consider on the flow idea.
Wonderful. Let's talk just about a couple of things. Thinking of your company, you might first start looking and saying, okay, what parts aren't acting in harmony with other parts? Again, you're going to see that the systems thinking idea and flow are also related. If we put these in Venn diagrams, they would overlap, because when we're not acting in harmony, we've got a challenge. So start thinking about what parts of your company are not acting in harmony with the other parts of your company. And then the other question we might ask is, how much time do you spend in firefights? Boy, if you're like most of the companies I see, one of the biggest points of firefights in technology companies is when we get to the end of the cycle of trying to bring all of our work together, and all of a sudden we're firefighting because we've acted in a way where we bought big upfront plans together at the last part of the project. But instead, look holistically at your organization. See where you're spending most of your time firefighting. And then the last thing that I might suggest is consider something that's not on this slide, but consider not allocating your people at 100% of their time all of the time. We're not suggesting that you cut it to 50% or 40% or anything like that, but give people time and space to think so that they can innovate on your business needs. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts there?
No, I think I'm much in line with that. Like the firefight, I think, is probably the biggest thing that will like ruin any flow. And I've seen organizations where, yeah, like there would be a production issue or the end of a sprint, and it just turns into a nightmare scenario where you have a large team of executives and leaders and managers and everyone in a room or on a call trying to resolve a problem. Usually what it turns into is it turns into finger pointing. But the whole firefight issue, it's something that is completely avoidable. And it's once you avoid it and have the teams working through the flow, through the systems and so on, and that agile mindset, it just becomes that harmonious work environment where everything just sinks in. Everything is in good working order.
You know, Chris, on the sales and marketing side, the business operations side of a company, which is where I spent my career primarily with technology companies, but not in technology really. I see the same things, and it really starts at the top. In order to get sales and marketing working together, you have to start at the top. Can you tell us a little bit about how you apply this as a leader?
Wow, what a great question. And it kind of leads to this last part of what we're going to talk about here. And it is that leadership really is the foundation. And there's two things that come to it. You know, there's a story. I'm a big W. Edwards Deming fan because he's the father of modern management and a lot of modern quality. Professor at Columbia University for a long time, rebuilt the economy of Japan. And then in the 1980s, when Japan was awesome and America sucked, he had the ability, manufacturing that is, not the whole country, he had the ability and the boldness to say, well, if other parts of the world can have great manufacturing, so can the United States, right? And what he said was this. He said, you know, you can't delegate this responsibility away. What he said, he was talking to a leader of one manufacturing facility in the 1980s who wanted to send one of his representatives. He was the VP who was in charge of this whole thing. He wanted to send one of his representatives to come find out what another factory was doing. And he was so crystal clear because in the response, he said, if you can't send, don't send anybody. That's how important the role of leadership is. That's why you're here today. That's the challenge that we extend to each of you. If you're experiencing value delivery challenges, which many companies do, then that's why you're here, because you've got to own the system. You can't delegate away that responsibility. You've got to know what it is that you must know so that you can lead the way. It says this right here. You know, this is another quote from W. Edwards Deming. It's not enough to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best. We got to change the way we think. It goes back to mindset. We've got to see the system as a whole, and we've got to work on the flow of the organization. And only one group within the organization really has the levers to control all of those things, and that's the leadership. Now, often we hear people say, well, can't I lead where I stand? You absolutely can. Can there be grassroots organizations to help push this up to senior leadership within a company? Absolutely, there can be. but somebody somewhere's got to start leading with this idea in mind. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts here about leadership?
No, I think you've hit all the points on the head there. I think the only thing I can add to it is like how critical it is from a leadership perspective, and it's not again to the point. It's not just everyone in the offices kind of giving out the strategy and direction. It's everyone has to take that leadership type role and view and mindset to help grow everything organically to make things better.
Wonderful. Goes back to this last quote. People are already doing their best. Most people, are there some bad apples? Sure. But in my experience, they're few and far between. Most people really do come to work every day to do their best. And the problems are with the system, and only management can change that system. Well, Bill and Lilia, I think that brings us to the end of where we are in this conversation today.
Yes, so thank you. We are close to the end of the webinar. We've got a couple of questions. Zoya, I should answer it separately. I'll email you the answer. It's about what is the process to know how much time is needed to allocate for the development? So we can discuss that later. Well, thank you, our subject matter experts, Chris and Jerry, for this wonderful webinar. I personally have taken a lot, and we've started brainstorming with our leadership team how to improve our approach and process at Hebron Soft. Thank you, Bill, for being also on this webinar and helping to facilitate it. I guess if you have any questions, please email us, contact us at hebronsoft.com. Also, you can scan from here from your phone and go to our LinkedIn group for further discussions. And we've got also several links for you. I am copy pasting them here in the chat so you can press and find more information. The Agile C-Suite, Agile at Scale, and Leading Agile Transformation. The links from Jeremy and Chris provided beforehand. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next Hebron Soft Institute webinar, which will be on design thinking and how to make your technology work so in just double clicks you can solve your problems.
Yes, double click. Great.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, good to see
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.